Hey everyone, what's up? And welcome back to the Video Village. In today's tutorial, we're going to be creating some basic 3D text inside of DaVinci Resolve Studio Fusion. We're going to light it, we're going to animate it, we're going to add some color and some glow, and to top it off, we're going to add a lens flare for effect. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at what we're going to be creating today. Okay, so I chose this word anomaly, sort of a mysterious title. Maybe this is for a sci-fi film, or maybe it's for an Amazon series or what have you. But in any case, it's a simple animation, and sometimes simple animations are really, really great and very effective. All right, so before we get into building our own version, I just wanted to go ahead and kind of walk through everything that's in this composition so you kind of get an idea of what's here and what's going on. So if we look over here in our preview window, this is our 3D landscape. So everything that we've got in this composition that's showing up over here is over here in our 3D world. So basically, this is our text right here. This is a directional light up here. This is our point light down below. I don't know if you can see that, it's below the text, and this is our camera, and so you can kind of see how things are moving. So the camera is pulling away from the text. We've got our point light, which is also moving out. So the point light is creating this bottom illumination. It's underneath the text, and it's creating this sort of this nice eerie looking light at the bottom of the text. And then this overhead light, our directional light, is rotating slowly, so it's kind of touching the edges of the text, and then eventually, as it rotates, we get more thorough illumination on the whole title, and that's where we end up. By then, the camera's already back a ways. It's back to about here. So the text is also animating, it's rotating, and the space between the letters is also slowly drawing closer and closer, and that's our lockup. That's where we end up. So in terms of our node tree, it's actually pretty simple. So this is our lighting, this is our directional light, this is our point light, and I've grouped these together. This is called an underlay, and this is a great tool for staying organized, especially when you have a whole bunch of nodes and things are moving around. You can kind of group things together and keep track of your composition. It makes it a little bit easier when you're organizing your shots. We've got our camera 3D, we've got our text 3D, we've got our merge 3D, which is basically how we put everything together in this 3D world. Then we go out to our render 3D. This is what actually gives us a result. And so this is also where we're going to change our render type. I think by default it's to software render, and we want to go ahead and go to OpenGL render. It just gives a more natural and clean result. And then of course we go to our media out, and then we go back to our edit timeline. That's what gives us our final result here. So again, this isn't a huge node tree. We're really not using very much. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like 7 nodes to create this scene, and that's not too bad. So we're going to go ahead and build this out from scratch, and let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to go to our Effects tab, and we're going to grab Fusion Composition, and we're going to drag it into our timeline and create a new timeline. I'm just using the timeline that I already created for these other titles. So, and I'm going to drag it out to about, it's like 20 seconds long. Okay, so here's our Fusion composition, and to get into Fusion, we're going to click on the Fusion tab. And so here we are inside of our Fusion application. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to want to start to pull out some of the nodes that we're going to use to build this composition. And most of them are already here on the toolbar. So what we need is we need 3D text. We need a 3D camera. We need our merge 3D. We need our 3D renderer. And we're going to need our lighting. Now, as far as lighting goes, there in the main menu bar here, we have a spotlight, but we don't want a spotlight for this one. We want something else. So we're going to come over here, up here to our Effects tab. We're going to open that. So if you come over here to Tools, you're going to see some extra lighting options here. So for this one, we want a point light and we want a directional light. Okay, so let's close that. So essentially, this is it. These are the nodes that we're going to use to build out this composition. Let's get started and start connecting these. So what we said earlier is the Merge 3D node. This is basically your entire 3D world. Any elements that you add to your scene are going to be plugged into the Merge 3D node. So as far as the Merge 3D node, I think this is pretty much unlimited inputs. Whatever you want to put into it, it will accept. But again, this is our world where we're going to be bringing everything together. So if we click on this node and we hit the number 1, this will give us a view of our 3D world. Okay, so let's start building this out. So we're going to take our 3D text and I'm going to push the number 2. And so this way we can actually see what we're typing. So I've loaded it, by hitting the number 2, I've loaded it into our sort of program window here. If I typed the number 1, it would give it to me in the preview window. And this is sort of our overview of everything that we have in our 3D landscape. And this is more of what we're actually going to see in our composition. Now we haven't connected all of these nodes yet, so we don't have a real flow to our end result, but we're just getting started here. So let's turn that off. Let's go here and let's type in our text, and I'll use the same text. So I'm pretending this is for a new series called Anomaly. It's a sci-fi thriller. So we'll type ANOMALY, Anomaly, and we're going to pick a better font. In this case, I used Tungsten Condensed. We can go bold. Now let's use semi-bold. Okay. All right, so there's our text, and it will come in rather large, so I'm going to shrink it down a bit. It'll be easier to manage that. Now, what we're going to want to do here is we've got our text, but it's not, well, it's not true 3D, as you can see. It's flat. So we've got built in here our extrusion option. And so now, if you'll notice, and we go to our extrusion depth, look at what's happening. All of a sudden, we have this 3D text going on. This is really, really cool, just being able to extrude it right there inside the inspector. So you can make it as long or as short as you want, but this is where we do that. So one thing we're going to do is we're going to refine this more as we go along. We have it lit and we can start to see shadows and lights. It'll be a little bit easier to manage. So right now it looks a little bit, well, it's kind of hard to see, you know, what the edges are doing and all that, but we will get to that. But this is a good start. This is where we're going to begin. So there's our title. And I think I'm going to move the tracking out just a little bit so it's not so bunched up. There we go. Okay. So in order to make this a little bit easier to work with, let's just start connecting all of these nodes and making our node tree. So the first thing we're going to do is, again, everything's going to go into the Merge 3D. So our text is going to go into the Merge 3D. Our camera is going to go into the Merge 3D. Our point light is going to go there. Our directional light is also going to go there. Then from our Merge 3D, we're going to go out to our renderer, our 3D renderer, and then out from our 3D renderer to our media out. Okay, So if we turn this and we go to the number 2, we're going to load whatever's here into our viewer. And there we go. So I'm going to come over here to my Merge 3D node. Remember, this is our 3D world. I'm going to type the number 1. And now we have our 3D world loaded over here. And this is where we're going to be making our adjustments to everything and setting up our shot over here. So if I move the camera, you can see that we are getting a result. The camera is seeing, this is what the camera is seeing right here. The other thing I'm going to do is come over to the camera real quick, and in our controls, the focal length, millimeters. In this case, I want to go with 35. You could change this to, say, if you wanted a 55 millimeter lens, or if you wanted something more drastic like an 85, you could do that as well. But in this case, let's just go with 35 millimeter. We can transform the camera. We've got translation sliders for X, Y, and Z axis. And so we'll be animating our Z axis for this particular animation. So we've got our directional light, and that's going to go up above. And then we're going to grab our point light, and we want to bring that down. So we're just kind of roughing in the positions right now, just getting everything set up the way we want it to look. Okay, so just a quick recap. Here's our setup. We have our text, we have our directional light, we have our point light, and we have our camera. And that's essentially our very basic setup inside of our 3D space. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to jump in and start animating our text. So the first thing we want to do is we want to get our final frame, or our lockup. So in this case, I'm going to pick an end time, and I think I'm just going to make it a little long. Let's just say 220 frames. Okay, so by 220 frames, the text is going to be done. We're going to be locked in. So I'm going to look at this, look at the framing, and I think I want to open it up just a little bit. I don't want it to be too close, but I think like that's going to be my lockup right there. So I'm going to go ahead and make a keyframe for the tracking, and that is the space between the letters. So again, we're working in reverse here. We're reverse engineering this. So this is where we want to end up. At the beginning, however, we want the tracking to be open. We want these letters to be much more open. And so what they're going to do is they're going to start to draw themselves together, and then they're going to land on their lockup frame. So we've got one parameter of animation, and we're going to jump to our next. The other thing I want to do is add some rotation. So again, we're going to come to our end frame. We're going to go to our transform, and we're going to be working with the Y-axis rotation in this case. So here's our end frame. That's what we're going to want to end there. Let's go back to the beginning, and we're going to rotate these letters away from us. So kind of sideways, I think, right about there. So now, of course, what's going to happen is these letters are going to rotate on that axis. They're going to slowly rotate, and then they're going to land. So we've got two animation attributes going on right now with the text. And I think that's going to do it for the text, because the camera is going to do the rest. So we're going to take our camera and we're going to pick our end frame. And I think for the end frame of the camera, I'm going to draw it out quite a ways. I'm going to go to 300 frames. And we're going to translate our Z space. And I'm going to go back to about there. And let's add a keyframe. And let's zoom on in and kind of see where we want to start. Maybe we want to start up really, really close. Maybe we just want to really start close. The camera starts pulling out. And sorry, it's rendering a little slow. My machine is a few years old, and it's chugging a little bit. See, I'm recording the screen, and I'm trying to render this out. So I apologize for the lag. Okay, that's pretty good, but I think I might even want to go a little bit further in, or start a little bit further in. So how about if we start like right in there? And then we pull back, and by 300 frames, we are done. And I don't know if you can see this, but there's a little tick mark. So whenever you make a keyframe for one of your properties, whether it's for the camera or text, or depending on what node you're on, you'll see the keyframes marked very, very clearly on the timeline. So there we have that at 300 frames. Okay. So the other thing we're going to do, of course, that we've done before is we're going to smooth these out a bit, because we don't want our keyframes, we don't want everything to hit hard. We want everything to have sort of an elegant, gentle curve going from one position to the other. So let's take our text. We've got our character spacing here. And by using our zoom to fit button, we're going to get ourselves to a place where we can see the change over time. And these are linear keyframes. So it's a hard start, hard stop. We don't want that. We want to soften them. So we're going to click on that keyframe and hit the letter S. Same thing down here, S, and here, S. Okay. That's our camera offset. So everything now should have a smooth keyframe. So as this is all playing out, we should be able to see everything easing into place rather than coming to a hard stop. And this is what we want. We want a nice, soft landing on all of these keyframes. And I think we've achieved that. That's looking pretty smooth. I like it. So again, to open these properties, to open your spline, it's this menu button up here, spline and your keyframes. You can open those tabs. You have access to your keyframes and your splines, and you can make adjustments however you see fit. Okay, so we've got this animation and it's looking pretty good. It's heading in the right direction. So the next thing we want to do, I use this sort of alien blue color, sort of this deep sea or alien blue color. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to go to our text node and we're going to go to our shading tab, and where it says material solid, we're going to grab this color and we're going to make it that deep oceany alien blue. And so now we have sort of that bluish color. And so again, we're making some progress here, but it's not quite ready to go. We're missing something very important here. So we've got lighting, but we're not seeing it on these letters. And this does not, this does not look very good compared to, say, that. So what's going on? Well, the problem is the text is not receiving the lighting or the shadows. So the way we do that is we go to our Render 3D node, which is right here, and we click on Lighting and Shadows. And so now the renderer, we're telling the renderer, hey, these lights are hitting these letters, and we want you to generate the lighting and the shadows resulting from hitting the edges of these letters. So that's how we end up getting that to work. And if you look over here, yeah, it's starting to look more like it's supposed to. So now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to play around with these lights. So we're going to animate them just a little bit. So what we're going to do is at the very beginning, we've got this light and I've got it just completely under the title. Right? So let's go to our point light and let's go to our transform tab. And so the Z space is that it's directly under the title. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to make a keyframe. And then once the title settles in, we want this to be out in front. So you can see what's happening here. We're bringing it out front, and by the end, it's going to be lighting the title from the bottom. So we have this gradual reveal. So it starts in the dark and then slowly it creeps out and we have this nice reveal. And then the other thing we want to do is go to our directional light. We're going to kind of do the same thing, but it's just this one's going to behave a little bit differently. We're just going to work with the Z rotation, because if you look at this here, you have some parameters. So like if we spin this light, you can see what it's doing to the edges. It's kind of clipping the edges there and having a little bit of a rim light on it, and then it kind of brightens up. And so you can use these attributes to change the lighting and make it a bit more interesting. So I think for this one, I'm going to take it here. And if we take this here, I'll just show you, like there, those are the edges. You can kind of see the edges, what's happening with the edges of the text. If we take this one, it creates a similar, I mean, look at that. That's kind of cool. In fact, I like that. Let's go here and make a keyframe, and then let's come out and we'll have it finish up at about 220. So I want it to cycle all the way through, like maybe like that. So it's dancing along the edges of the text. And then the other thing I would like to do is take our Z rotation for that same light and then give it a good spin as well, so that it maybe even lights up the text just a little bit on its own. Okay, so now this is where you can customize this. This is where you can really play around with this. This is where you can just take your time and work on the lighting and maybe change the direction or the fall off. There's all kinds of things you can do to animate the lighting. And in fact, why don't we, while we're here, let's go to our keyframes and our spline. Let's look at our lights. Here's our point light. There's the Z offset. Let's center it up. And let's turn that off. And we can kind of turn these off so we can just see what we're dealing with here. So the Z offset, let's smooth that out. The rotation, same thing, smooth that out. And we're going to smooth that out as well. So all of the light attributes, the directional light rotation and the point light space change, and the point light Z offset is also smooth now. So everything should be nice and smooth. It should have a very sort of fluid feel to the whole thing. We're going to turn off our keyframes on our spline. To stay organized, we've got our lighting right here. What we can do is Shift spacebar, and we're going to type in Underlay. And we're going to add that right there. And boom, now we have this little nifty little underlay, which helps us kind of see things when you're looking at things. So think about if you had a whole bunch of nodes, you had all this stuff going on. This really helps keep organized. Let's say for lighting, you had a dozen lights in here. Well, this makes it a lot easier to see right away what you've got going on in your composition. We can rename this. So let's do that. Not the directional light, not the point light. Let's call this Underlay 1, let's call it lighting. I'm going to hit OK, and there it is. And we can change the color, set the color. We can make it navy blue. There we go. OK. So this is looking pretty darn good. So we've got our camera moving, we've got our text animating, we've got our merge 3D. And if we look up here in this window, you can see everything moving. You can see the whole thing happening behind the scenes. That's how it's all built out. We've got our renderer, we've got our lighting and our shadows turned on, and we're going to our media out, and that's how we end up with our final shot. And so the other thing I did on the original was I came here to the composition, I went into my color tab, and I took the color boost and I bumped it up just a little. I really wanted to push that blue a bit harder. Then I added a node and I came over to my effects and I went to a glow. Now, one thing I did with the original, I went ahead and I rendered this out before I applied those things just to speed up the process a bit. But you get the general idea of how to add some color and add a glow to make this thing really, really pop. So again, that was the original. Lighting was a little different, but again, you get the idea. Last thing I did was I took a lens flare from my lens distortions collection and I added it to the beginning of the shot, so when this starts off we feel like the light's hitting us, kind of hitting us in the face, and then this starts to phase out. So I've got that layer and I've got the transfer mode set to screen. Generally, that's usually the way you're going to want to do it. And then you can change the opacity. We can make it a little bit more intense or less intense. So I encourage you to spend some time with this. Just try some different things. I think it's important to just really, really learn the basics and really get them down to where you become very proficient at them. So in this case, again, animating the text, animating the camera, adding some lighting, having the lighting affect that text in a way that is, interesting. Smoothing the keyframes. These are all things that are really important to work on and will, of course, make you a more proficient artist when it comes to building this type of work. Now, there are all kinds of ways to texture map this text. I mean, there's, rock and metal and all kinds of different things, and we might get into that in a later tutorial. But today I just wanted to show you some of the basics of how to get something like this done, and I hope you'll try it out and see what you can come up with. Alright, well that's going to do it for this tutorial. I hope you found this helpful. If you have any questions at all, please message me in the group or comment on the video and I will respond as soon as I possibly can. Thanks, and I will see you in the next video.